I saw a video of you on, I think it was either Stossel or Reason that posted it, where you were doing a talk at, I believe it was a Canadian university, and there were protesters.
Only 100.
Protesters outside of it.
Oh, yeah. Is that a low amount of protesters?
I know. I was gonna say it's a lot for
that was the most. I mean, I've never had more than 4 protesters in any other event, and this was not 100 protesters only. They created a body block to prevent people from coming.
Yeah,
into
wow. You can pull it in. We're going right now. You can pull that closer because this is fascinating. So. They literally were preventing, this is what I saw in the video at least, and I guess it's been confirmed, they were literally preventing people from just hearing him talk. And you know what they were chanting? They were saying, fuck Warren, over and over again. It was like, I was like, what are they doing? Yeah. Why are they so angry?
They were angry because they felt that when I talk about the politics of sex in a book I wrote called The Myth of Male Power, that I talk about that there's a whole sexual dance that men and women have. And the traditional female dance has been attract, resist, and the traditional male dance has been pursue, persist. And that tango is beginning to change. And it's probably very healthy that tango is beginning to change, but that it isn't a one sex is bad and the other sex is good. And so we see this now with Kavanaugh, where the current culture of hashtag Metoo is being evaluated. So a boy today, ready to go into college, in 26 states in the United States, he needs to get affirmative consent, which means the woman needs to say an affirmative yes before he holds her hand. So he needs to ask her if he can hold her hand, and then she needs to say yes. And so if he doesn't say yes, he can legitimately be accused of sexual assault for touching her hand without getting an affirmative consent. Now,
and this is in 26 states?
This is the law, some variation of that law, very close to what I'm saying, in 26 states in the United States. This is a result of the Office of Civil Rights under the Obama administration saying that there was, the first layer of this was that rape on campus was a common thing, which was not true, but it was based on the rape being defined of, have you ever had sex in a way at a time that you didn't feel like you wanted to have sex? No one explained that males on campus answer that question almost to the same degree as females do. But for both males and females, the great majority of times, it is like, I got drunk and I got involved and I got started. It was a little bit like asking the question, have you eaten potato chips more frequently, more potato chips than you've wanted when you started the process? And so both males and females feeling have had an experience at some point of doing that, but they use the female statistic only to say that there is there's a rape epidemic on campus. So from that, the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education issued what they call a Dear Colleague letter. And this letter said, if campuses must do the following: they must have this affirmative consent, and then if the male is accused at any, let me go back to the original part of that. The male who does not get that affirmative consent, who does get that affirmative consent, if the woman's, he must also get it at every other stage of intimacy in the relationship, up until intercourse.
So, like, can I hold your hand? Yes. Can I kiss you? Yes. Can I hold you? Yes. Can I touch your breast? Whatever.
Exactly. Can I kiss you?
Like a checklist.
Can I go from kissing your lips to kissing, tongue kissing, and so on? And so, and if he doesn't get that, he can be accused of sexual assault at any given stage. But here's the amazing thing: is that if he does do all that and gets an affirmative consent, and then later he's the one to initiate a breakup in the relationship, she might be angry at that and then say, well, you really didn't get an affirmative consent at this stage or that stage. And so he has no paperwork to indicate that he does. So theoretically, if he really wants to protect himself, he has to have paperwork to submit to her at each stage of intimacy. Wow. So and of course,
that's sexy.
That's
really could you imagine getting it signed off?
Exactly. I mean,
but I want a blowjob. Hey, let's mark this off.
That's a very good point, Justin, because I don't even think women want that. Could you imagine being with a girl, feeling the chemistry, and then saying, can I kiss you? Maybe that's okay. But then, hey, you mind if I use my tongue? You mind if I do this? You mind if I do that? Yeah. She might not even want that.
I remember.
Right.
Well, exactly. I remember when I was in college, and I said to her, I don't know if the word parking, like go out parking, is that still a word these days?
No.
No. Okay.
Like go to the drive-ins?
Thanks. You could have lied.
Throw me a bone here, huh?
So parking was like necking or or making out, that type of thing. And so I said to this woman that I was out with, Iris, I still remember her name because of her response. And so I said, we had a wonderful evening. I said, would you like to go parking? And she goes, Warren, you don't ask a woman if she wants to park. You park. If I don't want to, this forces me into having to admit that I want to do this. I want you to take the lead, take over.
Right.
If I don't want to park with you or I don't want to do something, I'll let you know. I just won't let you know in words. And this is, of course, the dynamic that women have traditionally expected, and most women today, if a guy is coming around on a date and he has 11 different forms there for each set of intimacy, just like you said, this is going to be like really a turnoff.
Yeah.
Because the function of this historically has been, if a woman says no, first of all, a woman felt that she wasn't respected if she didn't say some no's between eye contact and intercourse. And given us guys, with our testosterone, if the woman didn't say no, we'd be having intercourse within about 10 or 15 minutes at the most after the first hand holding. And so but the functions of the woman saying no was she discovered which guys, how did a guy handle no's, which gave her information about how does a man as a future salesman handle a no.
Mm-hmm.
Does the first no, does he back off and not come back again? And that's not a guy that's going to be a good provider. On the other hand, if he gets furious and upset and starts accusing her of things, he's not going to be a good husband. And so she got all this information.
It's important feedback
from this process, but the feedback is dependent on a mode of male-female connection, and that mode was that we as males are expected to risk. We're expected to do the risking of sexual rejection. Women have the option of risking sexual rejection, but the expectation is still on our shoulders. And what I'm suggesting in the boy crisis and in the boy crisis in particular, is that this needs to change. If we want, right now, virtually every entrepreneur, the common denominator of every entrepreneur is the willingness to take risks. Virtually every multi-millionaire or multi-billionaire entrepreneur that we know of that's self-made, that hasn't come from a background of wealth, is a male. And one of the reasons it's that the entrepreneurs who are billionaires and self-made are males is because we learn during all the vulnerable years of our life to figure out how to take risks, how to get rejection, how to go back and come at it with persistence, but with style and class or humor or some combination of both that fits the occasion. And that's what an entrepreneur needs. And so so the women are complaining that feminists are complaining that there aren't equal numbers of women in high places. Well, one of the many reasons why there aren't is because that they aren't trained in risk taking nearly as much as guys are. And so if women are going to say what they want, they need to say what they want, not just in terms of veto power. They need to take responsibility and be accountable and take the risks of rejection and start being trained to do that at the ages of 14, 15, 16 when they start to begin to be interested in sex.
Now, Dr. Farrell, do you think this is because evolutionarily speaking, I've heard scientists and anthropologists say that men, from an evolutionary standpoint, are disposable in the sense that you could have a society of 1,000 women and 100 men, and that society would succeed and be okay. But if we flip that, it would never work just because men can't, bear children. But we can impregnate, multiple women within a short period of time. So it makes us, evolutionarily speaking, we were the ones that took the risks because we could die and we would be okay. So we would be the ones that would go hunt, which was very dangerous, or we would historically be the ones to die in battle and war because, if we died, it was okay. And so it's part of that. Would you say it's part of that evolutionary process where, through cultures and through maybe even biology, we're just we're supposed to be the ones that take risks for a long period of time. But now that we have modern times, maybe it's changing because it's not as necessary.
So you're putting your fingers on an extremely important issue, which is when I wrote the book, The Myth of Male Power, the subtitle of it was Why Men Are the Disposable Sex.
Oh, wow.
And so this gets us into a number of different really important areas. One is that we've been trained, historically speaking, to have heroic intelligence. And heroic intelligence is intelligence for a short life.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the alternative to heroic intelligence is health intelligence, which is intelligence for a long life. And so with heroic intelligence, we were trained to do things like associate the willingness to dispose of ourselves with being a hero, like being a general in an army. And until recently, about 30, 40, 50 years ago, almost all the presidency, a very high percentage of the presidency that had the United States had military background. Many of them were generals, like General Eisenhower. And so we had a huge respect for men who managed to be willing to risk their lives and save us, but who did survive the process. And so part of what we did was give our boys social bribes. And the parents wanted their son, on the one hand, to be safe. On the other hand, oh man, I'm so proud of him. He joined the Marines. Look, here's a picture of him in his uniform. Doesn't he look great? And it's just like his dad and his grandpa. They all were top-level Marines. And oh my goodness, not only did he join the military, but he joined the special forces. Or he joined some elite group. So the word elite was another social bribe to get him to be willing to risk his life at an even deeper and greater level. And so this is so all of this was training for heroic intelligence. And part of the way we train boys for heroic intelligence is at a very early age to get them to associate their preparation for their disposability with being proud of themselves. And so we got them to play football, and we got the cheerleaders, the most attractive girls in the school, to say, first and 10, risk a concussion again. Which it wasn't exactly the words they said.
That would be a great cheer.
and which is
CTE.
CTE. Very good. CTE.
Everybody.
CTE. No longer will you be.
This hurts me a little bit. A little too close to home.
And so the cheerleaders never said, "Be careful there, be safe again."
Right.
Make a plan that isn't so destructive to you. It was hit him again, harder. Which is basically hit him again, concussion again type of thing. Mm-hmm. And so we learned to associate the willingness to risk those concussions with being a hero, being
honor,
and the cheerleader would cheer for us, and we're 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old boys, and we're looking at the most beautiful women in the school, kick their legs up, and we see under their dress, and they're the ones that are available to me if I'm willing to risk my my life. Mm-hmm. And so those became the associations, or what I call the social bribes, that associated being willing to be disposable with being loved. Mm. And so women associate being loved with being cared for, attended to, bought gifts, bought diamonds, being paid for. We associate love with having to perform to get to be able to not only have the love of the woman, but to risk our lives and show that we're disposable to take, and then to go ahead and risk rejection, and then to pay money, and the more she's beautiful, the more we're expected to take her to a nice restaurant, and every kiss begins with K.
Now the result of this, now that you're saying this, it makes perfect sense, because the result of that, if you stretch it out and extrapolate, okay, what would be the result of that, of the societal pressures like that, where the boys are encouraged to take these risks with their lives, if you will, either symbolically or literally, mm-hmm. and with the fact that you're saying the girls associate love with care and whatever, mm-hmm. what that ends up looking like is more extremely successful men, but also more men that have died at work, more work accidents, more maybe suicide, more the other type of risky behavior that may not be so desirable, like jail or whatever. Does that make sense? Is
that's exactly the follow-up on that?
Okay.
And so, men have learned that all the hazardous jobs are 90 to 100% males. 93% of the people who die in work in general are killed at work are males. And so if there is a shortage of money, especially in inner city communities, you take risks and sell drugs, and then you may kill off an opponent that's trying to poach on your territory. And so that then gets you in jail to a much greater degree. And so you're the one that makes the plan to rob the bank. You're the one that does something that's risky to earn money, so you can get the car, get the drugs, get the reputation, and get a woman. It's not the only goal to get a woman, but it is one of the goals to get a woman, to get the parental respect, and to get your self-respect. And so we have trained males to get self-respect by So now here's the connection to health intelligence, or the disconnection to health intelligence. If you're going to be prepared to be in war and die, and your first step is boot camp. And so at boot camp, let's say someone is Jewish, they're going to call that person, an anti-Semitic name. And the purpose of calling them an anti-Semitic name is so that they cannot be thrown off guard. You're training them to disconnect from their feelings, or you're going to push them to do something that's very risky, like in order to prepare themselves to be killed.
I want to interject there because
sure.
We've speculated on this.
Talked about this.
Yes, because for anybody who's maybe not following along or maybe doesn't agree, you just look and see the way men tease each other and the nicknames that men give each other versus the nicknames that
Like
women.
the worst nicknames we could possibly come up with.
We are literally terrible to each other, and we love it and laugh about it. I tell this story all the time. I had a friend who had a restaurant, and he was giving me a tour once, and he was introducing me to everybody. This is John, this is Susan, and then he introduces me to someone. He says, and this guy's name is Nine, and we keep walking. And when I come back around, I said, Nine. I said, is that a German name? And everybody starts laughing, and he says, "Hey, show them why they call you Nine." He holds his hands up, and he's missing a finger. And that's a classic way that men nickname each other. I don't think women call each other terrible nicknames as well. And you're saying it's because we're literally constantly testing each other.
Well, we're constantly testing each other, and we saw this as, I came into the studio this morning, and you had mentioned that it was 17 years and 16 years and 15 years, and the first thing I did is said, I could tell by the amount of,
You poked us.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I immediately liked you after that. Even though you put me down.
It was it was my way of saying, like, I find you guys, I like you guys, I like your energy, and we bond through that, with covered put downs, and anyone that can't hand that, we don't trust. And the reason we don't,
Absolutely.
so if we're firefighters, let's say, in all the hazardous professions, the more hazardous the profession, the more the commerce of the male in the hazardous profession is the trading of WIT covered put downs. And the reason for that is, let's say, I'm a firefighter, and the son of the fire chief who graduates from Harvard is coming in. Well, I'm not sure that son of the fire chief that graduated from Harvard is going to risk his life to save mine. And so I imagine that, and that if we go into a house and the roof falls in, and I'm trapped underneath that guy I'm not sure he's going to risk his life to save me. And so if he's a prima donna, I have to worry. If he's a guy that can sort of like be put down, who can handle criticism, who can go with the flow, he's far more likely, I sense, to be willing to risk his life because he doesn't treat himself so seriously, and he's willing to be part of a team that can do that, be self-effacing. And so now the trouble comes, and this is, the original question was, why was I protested? Because all of these things we all know are true. I mean, all of us guys know are true, and thoughtful women know that are true. But the feminist community that I was a part of, that I was on the board of directors of the National Organization.
The only man, I think, one of the only men ever
elected 3 times to the board of now in New York City. And so I'm a very deep supporter of true women's liberation. But when women's liberation, when feminism created a basic ideology that said the world is a patriarchal world that is where the rules are made by men to benefit men at the expense of women, that completely misunderstood the role of men. When men do earn more money than women, but not men in general. Dads earn more money than mothers do. And they start earning more money than mothers do because they increase their obligations and their responsibilities when they become dads. So we give up doing the things we want to do, like teaching, which is a passion, or being an artist, which is a passion. And when you have children, you give those things up to do things that make money. So you give up being that teacher and you become an administrator. You give up being able to come home every night to see your children and to see your family, and you become a national sales representative instead of a local sales representative. And because we make more money as a local sales representative, or we drive an Uber 60 hours a week, the feminist community says, see, on average, men earn more money. And they imply that men earn more money for the same work. But when I wrote a book called Why Men Earn More and What Women Can Do About It, I found that there are, in fact, 25 measurable differences between what men do to earn more money and what women do. And when women do those same things, they actually earn more than their male counterparts. And we see that as you dig deeper, that women who have never been married, who have never had children, earn 117% of what men who have never been married and never have children earn. And this is controlling for a number of years worked, age, and education.
Now, let me comment on that, because I'm going to make it a speculation, and this is just me guessing, but I'm guessing it's because, knowing myself, I'm a father and having friends that became dads. When men become dads, the first thing that we think is, I need to make more money, I need to bust my ass, I need to get serious.
Right.
Women think that when they don't have kids. Okay, I don't have kids, I don't have a family, I need to bust my ass and make a lot of money. And maybe they're doing it because of their career. When women tend to have children, what I've seen is they tend to value flexibility in their work, wanting to spend more time with their kids. This is obviously traditional stereotype, but I think it's probably true more often than not. Am I off? Or?
No, you're 100% on. This is exactly what I found when I did the research for Why Men Earn More, and these are all things that women can do. So and you see this particularly. Many women say, well, bosses have a stereotype of women, and so they feel that when a woman's going to have a child, that she's going to be less devoted to her kids
or to her work.
And it turns out that this is actually quite accurate. So women who have master's degrees, MBAs, who start their own business earn only 49% of what men earn who start their own business. And why? When we asked the men what they wanted out of starting their own business, 76% said their first priority was to earn money. Women's first priority, by their own acknowledgement, was to have flexibility, exactly what you said, was to be able to be close to home, to be near the children, to be able to have free time, to be their own boss, to be fulfilled. And then down the scale, about number 5, was to earn money. And so the importance of that statistic is that women who own their own businesses have no bosses to discriminate against them.
It's their own.
It's their own choices. And your original point about the women who have never been married and never had children, you're exactly right. When a woman senses that she's not going to be married and not have children, she doesn't sense that she's going to have somebody else to support her. So she goes out there and makes a good living and does very well. And she gets promoted more quickly than her male counterpart, even in the 500 top companies in the country.
I think it's important to note, too, that the important thing is that people have the freedom to choose whatever direction they want to go. And when you look at the societies with the most egalitarian type policies, like some of the Scandinavian countries, you actually find that the disparity between the jobs that men and women choose are even greater. And it's not because they're being forced, it's because they tend to like and choose different things. They have the freedom to choose different things. Women have as much freedom to choose to work 80 hours a week and be CEO, and men have just as much right, freedom to choose to stay at home. But they even more so choose the different things. And what they actually found in some other data that I read was that the more difficult circumstances were, the more likely women were to seek out jobs that made more money, and you saw a smaller gap, mainly because they kind of had to. But once things were more prosperous and they had more freedom to choose to be at home, that tends to be more often than not what they choose to do, and the men more often than not choose the responsibility of being the breadwinner. And I don't see why this is a bad thing necessarily. Now, you were in the feminist, you were part of the Now group. And that was back in the 70s, I believe, right?
Yes, correct.
Has feminism changed since then? Because I keep hearing people talk about third wave feminism and how it's changed. And what were they fighting for before, and what's different about it now?
When I started my work with the feminist movement, Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan used to both say pretty much the same thing. Gloria Steinem put it in these words: what the world needs is more women at work and more men at home, and more men as dads. And I agreed with that, because what my belief was at the beginning is that we have mastered survival enough in developed countries to be able to allow people the freedom to be who they want to be human beings rather than human doings. We men were never trained to be human beings. We were trained to be human doings. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm an author, I'm a soldier. And so we knew that if we were to be worth anything as a man, no woman was going to marry a guy who's, he's unemployed, but I love the books he reads, and so he's very thoughtful and sensitive and caring and warm, but I don't think he's going to earn any money. So I'm going to marry him because he's really sensitive and warm. And so we all knew this, and women knew this, and women among themselves are very specific about they want, give me a salary man is the way they put it in Japan, or find me a man that's wealthy. What does he do? What does he do? And so we're basically human. We were trained to be human doings, and so So as the feminist movement evolved, two things happened. Well, lots of things happened, but two of the things that happened is one was that there was a higher. We evolved out of the civil rights movement, in which there was an oppressor and an oppressed. There was a slave owner and a slave that we evolved from. So there was a clear hierarchy of oppressor and oppressed. And then the early part of feminism, a good portion of it, was Marxist feminism. And Lenin believed that the nuclear family was set up to be oppressive to women. And so the feminist movement grew out of another oppressor versus oppressed. It was Marxist feminism. You had the oppressor class and the oppressed. And so since we earned more money, men did, we were considered akin to the oppressor class. And so that was the fault of us as feminists. We assumed that because men earned more money, it was about male privilege or male power. We didn't understand that the road to high pay is a toll road. And when you become a dad, you're willing to make those tolls because you care more about your children not having to pay those tolls in the future. So walkouts, if we wanted to go from here to the airport, any airport, we would probably call Uber or Lyft. And 90% of those drivers are going to be males, not because they have male privilege, but because they have male obligations to support families, and anybody can become an Uber driver. And the men do it more frequently than the women because they have more obligations once they have children, or they're planning to they're single and they're wanting to have enough money saved up so that they can be valued enough to be able to ask women out and pay for women. And so what the women's movement did is started gender courses all over the world. And so when the men earned more money, they immediately called that power and privilege rather than calling that. I am so appreciative of men for when the children come, and women that we try to create options for our wives to be with the children or not with the children. And so we have, in this current moment, we have when men and women have children, 40% of women do not work outside the home at all. 40% of women work full-time, which is 35 hours a week or more. and 20% work part-time. So women have the choice of working full-time, children full-time, or some combination of both. And men have three choices too. Option 1 is to work full-time. Option 2 is to work full-time. And option 3 is to work full-time. And that's considered male privilege.
Do we know what the statistics are of how many men work full-time when they have children versus how many men who stay at home?
Yes, it's about, let's see, I think among the people who stay at home, it's about 6 or 7% males who stay at home full time. And so but there's some men and women who don't stay home at all, where both people work.
Now, I do see that the early, feminist movement or women's movement, was addressing some real issues that needed to be addressed, right?
Yes.
Like voting. There were laws where women couldn't do certain things without their husband's consent. Societally speaking, women were, if they did anything outside of what a woman was supposed to do, it was, the pressures were terrible, and they weren't given necessarily the freedoms to be whatever they wanted to be or do whatever they want. So I could definitely see the value in that. But that kind of movement never really has happened for men, where we feel that same kind of freedom.
Right. And so the two parts of what you said are very important, because women did not have freedom. Neither did men. And so our parents did not go around talking about, I'll give you an example. My father, when I started in high school, I started taking an interest in writing. So I wanted to go to the public library to sort of do some research for my book. And my father said, no, you have to take care of weeding and mowing the lawn and taking care of all these things. By the time I got finished with my chores, I had maybe a half a day a week to be able to go to the library. And that's about what he allowed. And so when I wanted to write my first book, he said, Warren, well, first of all, when I wanted to get a Ph.D., he would say to me, Warren, maybe you should get not a Ph.D., but a J.O.B. Because he was fearful that I would try to do something like be an author. And he knew accurately that about 99% of authors, just don't make it as authors. It's a very, very challenging way to make a living. If you don't have a family, yes, you could be an author, and you could live off of a small amount of money. But so he was warning me right from the beginning. It was not until I got my third book contract of more than $100,000 that he said, okay, I see, maybe you can make it as an author, because he was training me to be responsible, and so not to have choice. And so I didn't feel free. And if you look at the biographies of Picasso or almost anybody who's an artist, almost all of their fathers and mothers were saying, this is not responsible for a male to do. You can, unless you came from a wealthy family, you could not be you could not do what you wanted to do. You had to do what you had to do. That was the job of a man. And the feminist movement has taken that set of obligations on men and because it led to men earning more money so their children could do better and not have to earn more money and have more options in their lifetime. It took that set of willingness to be able to support our family, the male obligation, and it turned that into, you earn more money, therefore you have more rights, therefore you dominate.
So how do you feel about this current movement to dissolve gender roles?
I think it's wonderful to dissolve gender obligations. That is, the obligations from so in other words, I've always been in favor of what I call gender liberation, and that's liberation from the rigid roles of the past to more flexible roles for the future for both men. So we'll have some boys that will sort of naturally be, want to do things that are higher risk taking and that go to the military, to be firefighters and so on. And if that boy chooses that with knowing of the risks and chooses to play football, knowing of the risks, great. But let's see now, if he's playing football at age 8, is that something that he's consented to? Or has he picked up a desire to sort of, what are his motivations? And the job of us as parents are to sort of talk through our children's motivations and make sure that their motivations are not based on, I think I'll be more liked, or I'll be more loved, I'll be more respected, and therefore be a victim of what I call social bribes. It's to think through what they want for themselves in their life. My father I was the only strong part of myself as a human being physically is my legs. And when I was in high school, I was able to kick very far. But I was 149 pounds and 6'1". And my father said, if you're a good kicker, you'll be tackled and mangled. And so my father prevented me from doing that kicking, which I didn't like at the time, but I'm glad he's probably saved myself in a significant way. And so he helped me in his case, he didn't give me the option when I was in high school to think that through, because he knew that I would choose adulation over a common sense preservation of my body. And he just made clear, listen, you're a student body president, you have enough respect, give other people a chance to have some respect. It was his way of doing
right.
it.
So I talk about on the show a lot that, as humans, we tend to do this because I agree with you that the dissolving of gender roles is a good thing. But one of the things I talk a lot about is that we tend to swing from one side and then we go the opposite extreme. Do you see any of that happening right now with the dissolving of the gender roles? Is there anything to worry about?
Yes. Well, first of all, I don't approve of dissolving of gender roles just because I don't believe in parenting by saying, listen, I don't want you to do what's natural if what's natural for you happens to be a gender role orientation. So it is not freedom to be told you can't do something. You can't do your male role. You can't do your female role. It is freedom to sort of help parents to help think through. First of all, it's important for parents to do the type of boundary enforcement that then trains children to have postponed gratification, which then trains the child to be able to accomplish whatever she or he wishes to do. So she or he doesn't have to resort to getting approval, but out of this few competences it may naturally have. But once you know how to do what you need to do, how to achieve a goal. If you have a dream, let's say to be a gymnast, but your father and mother, every time you said, I want ice cream, and your father and mother said, well, you can have ice cream after you finish your peas, but then you had a few peas, and then your father and mother said, well, okay, you had a few peas, that's good enough. Now you can have your ice cream. You learn to manipulate a better deal, and you don't learn to finish doing what you have to do, your peas, to get what you want to do, your ice cream. Therefore, your goal of becoming a gymnast cannot be achieved because you haven't learned the discipline of doing what you need to do to be a great gymnast or a great football player or a great scholar or a great at anything. So no matter what your dream is when you're a kid, you cannot fulfill it. That's if you don't have postponed gratification. And you don't get postponed gratification without parents enforcing boundaries. And parents enforcing boundaries, oftentimes mothers will say you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. And then especially if the mother and father are divorced, the mom will say, well, gee, the kid has gone through a divorce. He's having he's really feeling badly. He was bullied today. She'll find some reason to say, okay, sweetie, I'll tell you what, have a few more peas and then you can have your ice cream. So the kid learns, with mom, I can manipulate a better deal. With dad, he's much more likely, or she's much more likely to hear, excuse me, we have a deal here. The deal is you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. And so the kid goes, you're so mean. And dad goes, you can cry about being mean too, and then there'll be no more ice cream tomorrow night either. And so the kid with dad was much more likely to go, all right, the only way I'm going to get this ice cream here is to finish my peas. So children raised by dads primarily are only 15% likely to have ADHD. Children raised by moms are 30% likely to have ADHD. And one of the reasons for that is that the children raised by dads learn that they have to focus their attention on doing what they have to do, otherwise they don't get what they want to do. And we as dads do this through things like roughhousing as well.
Yes.
With roughhousing, we create a bond. And that bond is makes kids less resentful about doing something that we say that they need to do. Like, okay, we'll do some roughhousing until 8:30. Then you have to get completely ready for bed. Bedtime is 9:15. And if you get completely ready with your homework and chores, etc., by 9 o'clock, we'll have from 9 to 9:15 to do anything you want, including roughhousing. Mother goes, "What? You must be kidding! You can't get the kids riled up before bed." And she's also going, when she sees mom and dad roughhousing, like, do you not realize here that sooner or later somebody's going to get hurt?
Yeah.
Sooner or later somebody's going to,
inevitably somebody cries.
And inevitably somebody cries. And so mom is going, I feel like with dad, I have only one more child I have to monitor.
Yeah.
But dads don't read the boy crisis or anything else on parenting to learn that there's about 10 differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting. And each of dad styles parenting have two things in common. They help children enormously, and dads don't know how they help children. And so, and moms can't hear what dads don't say. And so, just taking the roughhousing example, very few dads will say, when I roughhouse, here are some of the outcomes for the children. A, they learn a greater amount of empathy. Empathy? Yeah. You must be effing kidding. How could you have roughhousing be associated with empathy? And here's how. Let's say John and Jimmy and Jane, brothers and sisters, and they're all, and the game is to pin down dad in a wrestling match, and dad versus dad pinning the three of them down in the wrestling match. And so dad throws the three of them on the couch, and the three kids jump off the couch, all trying to be the kingpin. And so in the process of being this kingpin, Johnny pushes Jimmy aside, and Jimmy pushes Janie aside. And so dad said, "Whoops, I'm sorry, you can pin me down, but you can't push the other one aside. You can't poke them with the elbow," and so on. All right, Daddy, let's go back to the roughhousing. And so they go back to the roughhousing, and mom's watching this, and sooner or later, with 100% likelihood of prediction, somebody will hurt themselves, or somebody will end up crying, or somebody will end up angry and hitting the other one. And so mom is feeling guilty that that dad is doing all of this. And there's and then the kids did cry, just like she predicted in her mind, and she feels guilty she didn't proactively intervene first. And then dad returns to the roughhousing after some of the crying, and she has no idea that why dad should be so insensitive as to return to the exact same process that led the kids to hurt themselves. And here's what happens in the process that dads don't explain. By returning to the roughhousing, he has told the kids what they can't do. And then he's given them a chance to try it out again. Yeah. And so he's training them to have emotional intelligence under fire.
To know when you're going too hard or when you're going hard enough. When I can hit.
When you can assert yourself and what is actually like violence, right?
Precisely. What's the gap? And so the children who do a lot of roughhousing, aside from having a much deeper bond with parents and being much more willing to do what the parents say because they're going to return to fun and get more fun, they learn exactly what you just said, which is what is being assertive and what is being aggressive. Now, mom and dad can explain to the kids what is being assertive and being aggressive, or wait, can they?
Or they can experience it.
They can experience it, exactly. And so, because you cannot explain intellectually what is being assertive versus being
especially
aggressive.
To a child.
I love that you talk about this. Because this is definitely something you don't see a lot in schools. And I found a good school that actually had rough and tumble play, and I thought that was brilliant that the teacher actually did the research and saw that psychologically this really helps not just boys but also girls as well, right?
Absolutely, it helps girls as well. And when you don't. And so one of the big differences between, where does the boy crisis reside? There's 10 causes of the boy crisis, but the single biggest cause is lack of father involvement. Basically, the boy crisis resides where fathers do not reside.
I have a question about that because, we're talking about, earlier we were talking about the feminist movement and what it was trying to do, which was to give girls and women the freedom to be whatever they wanted. Boys and men didn't necessarily experience that same type of growth. And you're saying a lot of it was driven behind this paradigm that the men or males are the oppressor and girls or women are the people being oppressed. And over time, understanding that and viewing society that way, I could see how public policy and attitudes started treating girls as, oh no, you're the oppressed one. We need to do everything we can to help you. You're the oppressor's boy, so we need to kind of ignore you and not worry about it. And then you come out with laws that give single moms lots of benefits, for example, not so much to single dads, or pushing policies that give mothers the ability to take the children and do what they want through divorce, whereas the men have. And by the way, statistically speaking, if you're a father and you get divorced and you go to court, and she fights for custody, and you guys have a fight. The odds are she'll win if somebody wins. Those are the odds, because we viewed things that way. What else has that caused as a result? Because I know single parenthood is exploded, and more often than not, it's men that are not there. By the way, I think some of that is also to blame for men. I think men do more often than not feel like they can maybe just leave and they don't have the same pressure to stick around. But there's also things like in the classroom. Classrooms have changed quite a bit, where they seem to be catered more towards girls and female type intelligence versus boys. Is that all true? Am I making correct statements?
Everything as in the past, every single thing you've said is well informed and right on, and hitting some of the most important points. The really important underlying point that you just put your finger on is, once we started from the assumption that it's males are oppressors and women are the oppressed, then everything we did for women, we couldn't do enough. And so that began to get women to be entitled and feel that so for example, we have the hashtag Metoo movement now, and hashtag Metoo is wonderful that women are speaking up and explaining what's bothering them. However, hashtag Metoo is also extraordinarily sexist, because any change in the male-female dance, the tango that men and women do, needs to have both sexes speaking up. If you have a tango, women attract, resist. Men pursue, persist. That's the basic male-female tango, the traditional male-female tango. And if you're going to change part of that tango because somebody doesn't like it, then the entire tango, by definition, has to change. And so if you don't have males saying, well, here's the part of the tango I like, here's the part of the tango I don't like, here's the way it feels to me, and how does it feel to you, we're not training people to do exactly what we need to do, which is to communicate with each other and hear each other's pain and feelings. So for years, maybe 20 years, I went around the world and I wanted to get men and women to understand each other. And to do that, I said to every man in the audience, every woman is in a beauty contest every day of her life. Guys, if you want to be in the beauty contest of everyday life that women go through, come up on stage and be in this beauty contest. And so I'd have in those days I was much more popular before I started speaking out against some of these things that I'm talking about now. And so I usually had 400 or 500 guys in the audience that would come up on stage and in the aisles and be in this beauty contest. And I'd have all the women be the judges in the beauty contest of everyday life. And the guys competed to win pretty ferociously. But the ones that got to be the top 6 finalists, when I interviewed them later, in front of the entire audience, they said, man, I was on the one hand competing to be seen as the best looking guy. And on the other hand, the way I was being treated was that nothing about me was at all of value except my looks. And I have a lot of important things to me. I have my values. I have, my integrity. I'm a pretty good student. I'm this and that. I'm more than just a body. And now I'm seeing that when I only focus on women physically, which I tend to do, I'm sort of leaving out a lot that would be really wonderful for me to focus on. And I can see why the woman feels often resentful. So then I said this is role reversal, so the women's turn now was to risk sexual rejection with the man. So I've calculated that there's typically about 100 risks of sexual rejection between eye contact and intercourse. And so I had just the women do the first few. The first thing I persuaded the women to do was to compete for the man that they were most attracted to. So oftentimes there was, 11 or 12 women competing for the winner of the beauty contest who now had both status and physical attractiveness. And then about 6 or 7 women competing for the other finalists. And the women, I had them just ask the guy out, be the one to win to ask the guy out, and then at least hold the man's hand and at least kiss him on the cheek. That was all that was required. And the man's requirement was to not be too easy, and so
real hard for us to do.
It's a real task.
That indeed was a tougher challenge, right? And so when the women came back and they said, every time in my life when I have used the word jerk, I have to admit that it was a man that I was talking about, but tonight I was the jerk. I was the one that said to the man that I was doing a better occupation than I actually was, that I had better prospects than I actually do, probably, that I have a better car than I could actually materialize. I promised to take them to a restaurant that I can't afford, and that type of thing. And then I physically took him by the hand because I wasn't winning, and I pulled him away from the other women. Now, that was usually the woman that won that guy. And so that she physically took over the situation. And she said, man, I acted like a royal jerk. I was a liar. I was physically aggressive. I didn't allow the women, I didn't even think about allowing the women an equal opportunity to speak up. And they really got, the pressures on that role. And so my desire in male-female issues has been to say both sexes have roles that leave them feeling badly about themselves in different ways. And #MeToo should be about a sharing of how that happens and what we want to change about it and where we want to have options and where we want to still have roles and so on. Let's have a good dialogue. And in order to have a good dialogue, we have to have one thing, which is the ability to hear each other's perspectives without becoming defensive, because the Achilles heel of human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And so I see that the reason I do communication workshops around the country is because I see that as being more important to solving these problems than any other single thing.
Wow, it's as if we are far
That's
more
amazing.
complex than we think we are, and we try to simplify everything and say, "Oh, that's good and that's bad," not realizing that there's much more to the story.
Exactly, exactly right, and this is why I am protested, because I am confronting and challenging the belief that it's women good and men bad.
You've also, I've heard you, and correct me if I'm saying it wrong, but I think you addressed it this way. I think somebody was talking about Black Lives Matter, and you said it should be Boys Lives Matter.
Yes.
Explain that.
Yes. So when a policeman, a white policeman or a black policeman shoots somebody, he's 24 times more likely to shoot a male than a female. So he's only slightly more likely to shoot a black person than a white person. But when the police officer shoots someone, it is the ratio of male versus female far exceeds the ratio of black versus non-black.
Now, is this controlling for similar circumstances? Because men do commit more crimes than women. So is it controlling for, in other words, both people have a knife, one's a man, one's a woman, much more likely to shoot the man type of deal? Or are they controlling for those types of things?
Let's see, it's the... that I'm not sure of.
Okay.
The chances are probably not.
Okay.
But I think for me, the takeaway here is that the role you play as a male, that is more likely to have you do the robbing of a house, to you to be in a fight with another gang leader in order to get more drugs or that type of thing. Mm-hmm. The role you play as a male is likely to lead you to have that gun, that knife, and then be in that victim role. And you need to re-examine that role more than you, and look at the impact of that, the sexism of the role, rather than the racism only. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the racism is a much smaller contributor to that shooting. Interesting,
yeah, because I think there are some biological drivers, but I think there's also the societal ones, and I think you're right. I mean, when it comes to risky behaviors, including the risky behaviors that are breaking the law, which is a risky behavior, because we're more likely to do risky things, we're probably more likely to break laws and place ourselves in those types of situations. We've gone through, in the last maybe 50 years or so, an explosion in single parent households, most of which are father absent, so there's no dads in the home. And we've now gone through at least a couple generations of that, where we can start to see the result of that, of generations, one or two generations being, raised in a house without a father. What are the consequences that we're seeing from that?
There's nothing that is more important than that question and the answer to that question. First of all, I found that boys were doing worse in all 63 of the largest developed nations. Developed nations had in common their ability, the permission for divorce, and for permission for women to have children without being married. So in the United States at the present moment, 53% of all women under 30 who have children without being married. Ones where they're not even living with a man, the man is almost never involved with the children, even from the beginning. The ones where they are living with the man, that smaller percentage, the children are likely to not have father involvement after age 3.5 to 4 in that area. Okay. And so the great majority of father absence is among children born to women who aren't married, and among children who are experiencing the outcomes of divorce. Okay. And so if you're a woman or a man listening to this and you're contemplating getting a divorce, there are 4 things that you can do to minimize the impact on children.
I'm divorced, so I'm very interested in hearing this.
Okay. Yeah. Those 4 things are that there's an equal, after divorce, that there's an equal amount of time that the children have with both the mother and father. Second is that the mother and father not be more than about 20 minutes of drive time from each other, so the children don't have to give up an activity or a friend's birthday or in order to go to the other parent's house and therefore resent the parent whose home they're going to. Third, that the child is not able to hear or detect any bad mouthing from mom to dad or dad to mom, because when the other parent is being criticized, the child is half of the other parent. And so the child isn't able to articulate that when you're criticizing dad or criticizing mom, you're criticizing them. And so that is one of the most underappreciated dimensions of child abuse in the culture. And then fourth, that mom and dad have consistent relationship counseling, not just emergency-based relationship counseling, so that when you have only emergency-based relationship counseling, everything is so compressed and you have to make the decision fast, and you tend to only treat the other parent as, that's typical of you. You made that decision for this reason or that reason. Whereas when you have a longer-term, not such an emergency-based counseling, you can start seeing the best intent of the divorce partner strategy. And when children have all 4 of those conditions are met, they do almost as well as they do in an intact family. Okay. However, boys suffer considerably more from any type of relationship breakup than girls do. This is counterintuitive.
Interesting.
So when the Department of Housing and Urban Development, for example, moved thousands of families from a poor neighborhood to a wealthier neighborhood with a better school system, and under the belief that that poverty was part of the problem that that hurt children so much, and they wanted to give children a fair chance. Well, the girls in the new neighborhood ended up doing very well. The boys in the new neighborhood did worse as a rule. They were more likely to be depressed. They didn't. It seemed like they were going to do much better because they'd say, "Okay, Jimmy, I'll see you again. No problem, no problem." And without sort of crying it out and stuff like that. And then they got into the new neighborhood, and they weren't able to adjust. They missed the people that they were so used to a greater degree, because the emotional skill sets and nuances of knowing how to reintegrate was less for boys than for girls. So they had fewer outlets for their grief and the sorrow, and they sought less support, and they got less support, in part because they sought less support, and in part because we don't expect to give boys more support.
So in other words, we boys are encouraged to not cry out or say I'm sad as much as girls are, and we tend to be viewed as tougher.
Exactly.
So they just don't get as much help.
Precisely.
Okay.
And part of what I say in both the myth of male power and in the boy crisis is that men's weakness is our facade of strength. And this is true not only with males, but it's also true with animals, from insects to birds to all animals. So, for example, here's a really fun example. Among buck elks, among all insects and birds and animals, about 85% of the procreation comes from the females procreating with the perceived alpha male. Mm-hmm. Okay, so to be an alpha buck elk, you have to have the biggest rack, and to get that biggest rack, you have to exhaust about 30 to 35% of your minerals, calcium, and nutrients from your body. So you are the apparent alpha strongest male, but in fact you are the weakest male, so weak that if the buck elk doesn't get rid of his rack immediately after the mating period, he's in great jeopardy of dying from malnutrition before the winter sets in, and there's not enough nutrients to replenish his nutrients.
Interesting.
So the what is considered his strength is really his facade of weakness. So men's weakness is his facade of strength. So men's weakness is their facade of strength, whether it's the buck elk or among us as males in other ways. And I'm sure you see this in
bodybuilding.
In bodybuilding, yes.
Right? Yeah,
yes.
I could totally see the parallel there.
Yes.
Oh yeah, when they're on stage and they look the most ripped and whatever, they're the weakest because they're so depleted. So what are some of the consequences of lots of kids and especially boys being raised without fathers? What do the statistics show?
I have in the Boy Crisis book 70 areas that boys who are dad deprived are hurt. So boys who are dad deprived, I was mentioning before, are much less likely to have that roughhousing, that connection, that bond. Girls who are dad deprived are much less likely to have that as well. It manifests in girls differently than in boys. So the roughhousing, for example, gives a girl an opportunity to be physically close to someone she can trust, and not feel that being physically close with a male means automatically being sexual.
Oh, fascinating.
And so girls who don't have fathers are far more likely to be pregnant out of wedlock, and then later regret it because they feel like they want to keep a hold of the boy, but they don't know all the nuances of how to do that. But they do know one thing, that they can keep a hold of him by being sexual with him, especially if Jane might be, and she might be rejected because she's not going to be sexual. She doesn't have other avenues of doing that. Or alternatively, they're so afraid of male intimacy that they can't connect and be intimate and open to begin with. And so they tend to err on both sides of the spectrum.
Interesting.
So boys are damaged by being less able to complete tasks, and therefore less able to do their homework effectively. Therefore, they do worse. Boys who are dad deprived do worse in every single academic subject. So if you look at children in a good school system without a dad, they do worse in math and science, especially the boys do, than children in a poor school system with a dad and in a poor community. And here's maybe a perfect metaphor for the difference between what happens to boys and girls. So I'll just give you a few of the list of things of maybe 5 or 6 of the 70. Children without dads, especially boys. Boys without dads is the number one predictor of suicide is not having father involvement. The number one predictor of committing crime is not having father involvement. The number one predictor of dropping out of high school is lack of father involvement. When you drop out of high school and you're a male, and you're in your 20s, the unemployment rate is more than 20%. The underemployment rate is a great majority of the rest of the boys who drop out of high school. Much more likely to be depressed, and much more likely to withdraw into video games and become video game addicted. A certain amount of video game playing is actually good for the brain, but at the addiction level, which is usually 13, 14 hours or more per week, and the video games alone, as this is not all electronics, just video games, you start moving toward addiction. And the average boy plays 13 hours of video games per week.
But it's not delayed gratification, right?
Precisely.
This is very much impulsive.
Precisely. The entire, put your finger right on it. The entire video game industry is serving immediate gratification. Now, some parts of some games are delayed gratification, and but there is
like Zelda. It takes forever.
But the addiction to video games is, of course, the problem. And when boys when boys, as a result of not having dads, don't learn the postponed gratification, they can't do their homework well, they can't succeed in sports, they can't succeed in weightlifting without the steroids or additional things to help them. And so they don't get the respect of girls, women, teachers, and they start feeling ashamed of themselves. So when it comes to boy-girl time, they find that the girls are more interested in the winners than the losers, and they're a loser. And so they start withdrawing into video porn. Video porn addicts. So what do guys get out of porn? We get access to a variety of attractive women without fear of rejection. Without fear of rejection is the important thing, at a price that you can afford. And so, and so the combination of all of that leaves the boy. He gets turned on by a certain sexual scenario, but then the next time it doesn't turn him on as much because there's not as much dopamine released by that same scenario being repeated. So he needs to go to riskier and riskier scenarios. So when he finally does attract a woman to his bed, she feels like an object, and like, wait, we want me to do this risky stuff in this way, and why, you want me to have anal intercourse, and you want to come over my face, and like, I really don't want to do that, and I feel really objectified. And
right,
so
this is only my second time.
This is my only second time. Yes, exactly. And so the woman is like, exit, and so the guy is then like, man, I'm just what I thought. I'm not good with girls, and so that only sends him back to the video porn that increases the addiction, because basically the mechanism of addiction is that it's constantly increasing your dopamine, which is your feel-good drug. You only feel good when you take more and more risks and get more and more.
So you just keep pushing it.
It worked for the pizza guy, right?
Yeah.
It's not working for me.
I made the speculation a while ago. We've talked about on our show early on, in fact, how frustrating and annoying it is to see. I have 2 kids, and they'll play sports, and I think it's silly that they'll play and they won't keep any score. And I'm not talking about when they play on their own, because they always keep score when they play on their own. I'm talking about organized leagues who will say, oh yeah, the kids are going to play, there's no score. And so we always talk about how that's silly, because nobody learns. You learn more from losing many times than you do from winning, and it's silly that they don't do that. But I speculated that was probably the result of a lot of fatherless, homes, and you have a lot of moms who now are organizing these leagues, and and they don't want anybody to lose, and it's usually the dads that are ones pushing for the winners and losers. Do you think that's an accurate speculation?
That is, again, right on. As a speculation.
Okay.
And the and it's
Sal just wants all these bonus points.
No, I'm glad.
Was that right?
Because I've said that several times. I want to make sure I'm not wrong.
No,
I'm just messing.
No, this is absolutely the case. and what dads need to communicate to moms is that you're training children to win comes with training children to lose. When you train someone to lose gracefully and lose, you train them to focus. You train them to be a good sport. You train them to know to take risks and to know what does and doesn't work and have it be measurable. You do have a greater likelihood of increasing the adrenaline to experiment, to do with what works and what doesn't work. You're training children for being able to be successful in business, being able to be successful in being rejected by somebody else that you want.
Real life.
Real life. All of
you lose
life.
a lot in real life.
Exactly. And to protect children until they're in college, and then continue protecting them in college like we're doing now, and then to send them out to real life is cruel.
Do you think that what we're seeing now with the cry closets and the victimization, everybody's a victim, by the way,
except white males.
Right. That's the one that isn't. Do you think that is the result of now maybe 2 generations growing up? Half of them without fathers. Do you think maybe that?
Absolutely. Part of what dads need to communicate, and as I said before, let's blame the moms here. We dads have to take responsibility for reading about what our unique contributions to parenting is. And then we have to explain that to moms, and then we have to be strong enough to be okay with moms being sexually withdrawing from us or emotionally withdrawing from us while they and we talk through intention mode what is best for the children.
Now, why did you say that? Is that because when a wife or a mom sexually withdraws from a man, we give in?
That's right.
Okay. Because you're saying we need to be okay with that. Like, in other words,
yes.
She might not want to sleep with you for a couple of weeks while you argue over this, but be okay with that.
That's right. Okay. We have to have the strength to be okay with not being manipulated by sexual withdrawal. And the strength to be okay.
It's a powerful tool.
It's a very powerful tool. And it's not just sexual withdrawal, it's also emotional withdrawal.
Sure.
And very few women have any idea of how much we want to be loved by women. Because we can't communicate with each other in very loving and caring ways, we have more dependency. We have more of our emotional eggs are in the basket of women. And so very few women know that, and yet at the same time they know that. And so they do withdraw, and then we eventually give in. And so then we ask ourselves the question, okay, the one thing we are valued for is bringing home a good paycheck. So I'll go back to, so I'll withdraw from being an equally
just work more.
What's that?
And then just work more.
Just work more. And so then we experience what I call the father's catch-22, which is we learn to love the family by being away from the love of the family. But when we ask men a different question...
By the way, you just explained my whole divorce right there.
Wow.
That's 100% what happened between the two of us.
Tell us more.
Oh, it's 100% what happened. There was withdrawal from, connection, sex connection, my withdrawal to work, and that just for 15 years, and it just turned into a divorce. 100% what you just explained. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And it's deeply sad because there's a liberal think tank called and research center called the Pew, P-E-W Research Center.
Sure.
And they, for the first time, they asked dads who were working full-time, what would you rather do, work full-time or be involved with your children full-time? That is, completely give up work and be involved with your children full-time. And 49% of children, of fathers said they'd prefer to be with their children full time, but they couldn't be because they had to earn the money.
Sure.
Oh. And that is what feminists are completely missing. And that is what is, and so almost every problem of the boy crisis goes back to that fatherlessness, because it is fathers who are more comfortable requiring children to go out of their comfort zone. So, for example, a kid comes home from school, and let's say he's 7 or 8 years of age, and he says, Mrs. Moyers, she hates me. I want to get out of Mrs. Moyers' class, and it's the first week or two of school. And so mom is far more likely to say something like, oh, sweetie, I don't want you to have a bad experience in school right when you're so young in formative years. So, or she's thinking that to herself if she doesn't say it in those words to her 7-year-old son.
Yeah.
And she's saying, I'll tell you what, sweetie, I'll meet with the teacher or the principal, and we'll get you the other teacher who would probably be better for you. And so, and dad is more likely to say, you know, sweetie, in life, you're not going to get along with everybody. And you have to learn how to get along with somebody. So maybe you should move out. But before you move out, let's find out from Mrs. Moyers why she's, behaving the way she is. You share with Mrs. Moyers what your upset is, and listen to Mrs. Moyers what her upset is. By the way, sweetie, what do you think if I talked to Mrs. Moyers? What do you think she would say? And then the mom will be looking on and saying, well, what do you mean? Our son is suffering here, and you're asking him what's wrong with him. And so the dad then gets from the son, well, Mrs. Moyers thinks that I don't pay attention in class. Well, why does she think that? Well, I do pass off notes to Jimmy, but it wasn't me passing off notes. It was Jimmy passing off notes, and I gave a note back to him. I got blamed for it, and so Mrs. Moyers is blaming me. And so when did Jimmy pass off the note to you? The moment Mrs. Moyers turns her back on us, he passes off the note to me. Then I pass the note back to him, and she catches me. So aside from not being a great manipulator, he's beginning to already see what maybe is creating the problem. And then dad finally persuades mom to set up a meeting with Mrs. Moyers and him, and Mrs. Moyers and the teacher and their son have a chance to talk with each other about what is bothering them and reach some type of understanding. And maybe that won't work, and maybe that does, but dads are far more likely to sort of push outside of the comfort zone of kids and require them to do what needs to be done to communicate about something rather than just play victim.
Now, talking about the schools right now, and when you first came in, we started this conversation around the teasing of each other, right? So how do you feel about this anti-bullying movement that we've been going through in the last decade or so?
Yes. The best way to minimize bullying, I grew up in the 50s and 1950s, not 1850s.
That's when bullying was cool.
That's right. And pretty
Greasers
much,
versus jocks.
Yeah, everybody built everybody. But some of the bullying was so bad that you were left with scars for a lifetime on the bullying, or you were left with trying to prove yourself, to the bully. And so bullying, taken to a certain past a certain point, is really bad. But on the other hand, what we find is that bullying, the bullies and the bullied have very similar personalities. They both have low self-esteem. They both don't do that well in school. They both are filled with different types of fears. They just have different ways of manifesting it. And so the bullies are likely to be physically stronger and bigger, but they are also coming from a very fragile place themselves. And so the solution to bullying, in my opinion, is probably best done in Denmark. In Denmark, in the ages of first and second grade, they have classes in which everybody talks about the feelings that they have and what they're experiencing and what they experience everybody else to be like, and what their own set of problems are. And so kids get to see each other as full human beings and not as objects. When you can reduce somebody to a simple name and get some pleasure out of bullying them and make yourself feel better, that comes from a personality that has only that way of feeling better about themselves. And so the solution to bullying is to work on the self-esteem of the bully as well as the bullied, and to also work on the communication process. So everybody in that classroom sees each other as a full person and sees the amount of pain that occurs and feels the pain that occurs from somebody that is bullied or pushing around.
I also think you want to go?
Do you see any value too with some schools I know that have structured it where they have different age groups all learning in the same facility, and that way, like you're able to inevitably you're going to see the older kids kind of sheltering the younger kids, or the younger kids looking up to the older kids. And I'm pretty sure they've shown a little bit less on the bullying because of that as a result. But have you looked into that at all?
Yes, and there's two important dimensions to that. One is when you have that, it's often coupled with a mentoring process. And so where the older boy or girl has somebody that they're mentoring, and where the younger boy or girl is being mentored by somebody. And so being mentored by somebody is very helpful. But more helpful than being mentored by somebody is being a mentor. So when you have that type of integrated class age-wise, and let's say I'm a 14-year-old boy, and I have a tendency toward bullying, but bullying is not approved of in the school. And so when I start to bully, I worry about how the 9-year-old boy is going to think of me if I'm seen as somebody that's negative in the school and not a really good role model. So the power of being a mentor is like the power of being a dad. You start becoming more responsible.
Ooh, that's
and more balanced.
Interesting. I do think that I think we tend to do like what Adam said, where we take the pendulum and we swing it so far. Obviously, if kids are being physically bullied or emotionally bullied and tormented, that's terrible, and you want to put a stop to it. But I also think there's some value in sometimes letting kids figure things out for themselves. Like if my kid comes to me and says, so-and-so pushes me around, bullies me, before I go and interject, I may say to my kid, okay, I want you to stand up for yourself and try and solve it yourself. Because we jump in too quickly, too often, because we're so afraid of everything. And we end up losing the lessons that can be learned.
That is exactly right. And that is why things like teasing and which now are called bullying,
right?
We protect the kids against that, and there's a tendency of moms are very wonderful at nurturing and protecting, and they often take that much too far, much too quickly. And so it is when all females get together and form teams that they want everybody to be nurtured and no one to learn the risks of what you were teased, you were bullied. So what do you do about it? Where do you go with that? Why do you think that happened? What could you do differently? What's the best? What are some options for best responses? If you were a dad, how would you tell your son to do that? Those are all the discussions that come from situations that are inconvenient, uncomfortable, and even hurtful. And if we protect our kids from all those things, we are not educating them and preparing them for life.
We're not making them strong. We're just protecting them.
I mean, look at what you have to do if you're anyone who is successful. If you're a Kavanaugh and you're wanting to become a Supreme Court justice, are you going to be able to do that without criticism? Every part of your past is going to be ripped apart. Now, if you're somebody that could only take praise and you can't take criticism, you're going to fall apart in the process of becoming successful.
Let's talk about that for a second. That situation with Kavanaugh. He's the gentleman that's going to be potentially appointed as a Supreme Court justice, and a young lady comes out and says that he sexually assaulted her 30-something years ago. So she was 15, he was 17 years old. And, I'm not on either side. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But here's the part that I find extremely frightening. And this may be a consequence of this, males are the oppressor, women are the oppressed, victimhood type of mentality in the Metoo movement. And that's that we have to listen to her because she's the one, she's the girl, she's the female, she makes the claim. We have to listen to her. We have to take what she's saying as truth. And a lot of people are doing that. They're saying, listen to the victim 100% of the time, all the time. Now, I understand where that sentiment comes from. If you are somebody who's abused, sexually or, however else, it can be very scary to come forward, and you don't want to feel ridiculed or criticized because that may prevent people from stepping forward. But at the same time, you can't presume guilty and then proven innocent. It's the other way around. Do you think this is the result of kind of like a little bit of a consequence of this whole mentality that men are the oppressor? So if a woman says something, 100% of the time it's true. Listen to them every single time.
Yes, and it is really. And first of all, I very much agree with you that and I love the part of the hashtag #MeToo movement that I love is that women are speaking up and letting the world know what is bothering them. So now it does create a bit of a challenge, because on the one hand, for the past 50 years, we've learned, I am woman, I am strong. And now we've learned, I am woman, I've been wronged. And so it's a little bit of a, let's see, are women strong and they can speak up and say what they want and they need? Or are they fragile, and are they repressing the things that are happening? And it's only going to come up 20, 30 years later that they've been angry. And so we're going to have to sort of work out that disconnect. But then secondly, the Office of Civil Rights literally prevented their investigators from writing into a report anything that, anytime a woman said that the sex that she once said was harassment or a date rape, was in fact that she lied or didn't tell the truth, because for whatever reason. So, for example, a woman and a man get drunk together and they have consensual sex, but the woman realizes she didn't call her boyfriend. That was in a different area, like she usually does, and so she says, "Well, I was in a terrible situation last night. I was raped," and so because she made a bad decision, and so if she does that, and the boyfriend says, "Well, you should call the police about that, or you should report that," and so then she reports it to prove that she, in fact, was telling the truth, and then it's investigated, and she begins to feel badly that she's ruining that boy's life. She then says to the investigator, actually, it was consensual sex at the time, but I was afraid to say so. The Office of Civil Rights required the investigator not to put that second level of comment that, in fact, it was consensual. They could not write that in the report.
Why?
Wow.
Because of exactly what you said before. A woman who comes forward has to be believed.
And that's just to encourage. I can see where that comes from. I mean,
Yes.
we have a lot of laws that are like that, where they're based off of feeling good, but nobody really looks at the potential consequences. Because I can understand why they might want to put that law forward and say, okay, we don't want women to be afraid. We want women, people who are assaulted to come forward, because it takes a lot of courage many times. So I can see the sentiment behind why, but what a terrible consequence.
Yes, it's a good case. In the legal field, they have an expression called "good cases make bad laws." And so when we're so desirous of protecting the female, we are willing to give away due process. And we've grown up, the very core of America, which makes it a special country in many ways, but other countries have this too, is you're considered innocent until proven guilty. And so the person who makes the accusation has to prove that accusation. And we've suddenly said, but with the exception of women who feel that they were sexually abused or sexually assaulted, or or had a date rape experience, you are not only to be believed, but even if you acknowledge that you did lie, then we won't believe you, because we know we're going to pay attention to any expression of upset that you had more than an expression of, well, actually, I lied for this reason or that reason. And we have very few good studies of the percentage of time that women lie in these situations. But in the Myth of Male Power, I did uncover 4 or 5 very good studies of this effect, and the range was between 40% and 60% that women did not tell the truth.
Wow, I would never guess that. I would have thought it was an extremely small percentage.
Yes. And that's what we're left with from the feminist statements. But they are, if you wish to see the hard data behind that, in the Myth of Male Power, in the chapter on the politics of sex and the politics of rape, I sort of discuss all the studies.
How long were you part of the feminist movement? How long were you part of the NOW organization?
I was elected 3 times to the board of NOW in New York City, and then I'd say that was like 1970 to 1973, 74.
Okay.
And then I was, my former wife became a White House fellow, so we moved from New York City to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
I became the wife of a fellow, if you will.
So are you now advocating for boys and men because I know there's going to be some people listening right now who are thinking, oh gosh, men don't need an advocate. Men don't need somebody speaking out for them. Women are the ones that need. But in some cases, I agree. But also, women do have a lot of advocates, a lot of people speaking out on their behalf, and there's nothing wrong with that. Are you doing this for men because you just see nobody's doing it?
That's basically correct. I've seen, and as you were saying, we have a tendency for the pendulum to swing from one extreme to the other. And when I started to speak out and say some things like, well, wait a minute, we have to be fair to both boys and girls. So my basic attitude is that we don't have a system of oppressors and oppressed. We have that when it comes to male-female issues, we're all in the same family boat. Whenever only one sex wins, both sexes lose. Because my wife and I, we're in this together, and if she's hurt, I'm hurt. And if we get a divorce, our children suffer. And so I was beginning to see the balance, the pendulum swing to the other side. And so I started to say, well, wait a minute, to be fair here, there has to be an understanding of what boys are going through as well as girls, and which is why I did the role reversal date and the men's beauty contest both, because I was getting both sexes to walk a mile in each other's moccasins.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Was there a pivotal moment that switched you doing that? Like, did something happen? You're like, whoa, that's not fair, and then you began speaking out on the other side?
For the most part, it was very evolutionary, but I'd say if there was one moment that was more pivotal than the other, I was at a board meeting with NOW, the National Organization for Women, and one of the women on the board of NOW said, we're having a problem that we're getting a number of letters from some of our NOW members saying that they don't like it that when our position on equality seems to be being interpreted that when there's a divorce, that the father has as much right to the children as the mother.
They didn't like that.
They didn't. Well, the women writing in were saying they didn't like that, and they were going to withdraw their NOW memberships if they felt that NOW was not supporting them, the mother, knowing what was best for the child. And so I listened to that, and their reasoning was they were worried about losing their dividing and losing NOW members, and therefore being a less potent group, and they felt they had a lot more to work with than just custody issues. And so while they understood that equality should be applied to both sexes, they at the same time were cared about their political power as well.
Allowed them to persuade their decision.
Exactly. And so I said, wait a minute, the issue here should not be where our political power rests, but rather it should be, position by position, we should be asking the question, not what's best for women, but what's best for the children. And so they said, well, women should have the freedom to raise the children the way they want. And I said, well, you should have freedom to have children. But once you have children, that's a free choice to forfeit your freedom and exchange it for what's ever best for the children. Your personal freedom does not trump your children's best outcome. And so they said, well, so what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I think if you want to work from an equal perspective, children should have both mother and father. And well, then what about a woman who meets a new man and wants to get rid of a oppressive husband and wants to move to a new area, which is the new man has a better and out of state, and they should have the right to do that. And I said, well, we have to do research and find out how children turn out when they have this outcome. So then I began my research that led to a book called Father and Child Reunion, and I started to see that my instinct on that children do best when they have both parents, was way was much more accurate than I expected. But then this was 20 years ago when I had this dispute with NOW. But that led people at NOW to be suspicious that I wasn't just supporting women, that I was also taking fathers into consideration and children into consideration. And so I began to lose some of my speaking engagements. And then I had to ask myself, do I want to, I was doing extremely well financially, speaking all around the world on women's issues. And it was really clear to me that if I started to do this type of thing, that I was going to lose that type of, career support. And I was able to get on, I was on every major TV show, the Today Show, the Tomorrow Show, and People Magazine, Parade Magazine. I was centerfold features and stuff like that. And I had and people were coming to my performances at, in numbers over 1,000. And so it was, it was seductive in a lot of ways and very financially helpful. And so I really had to confront myself and say, am I in this for the money and the fame, or am I in this to really help men and women understand each other?
God, how many people struggle with that decision right there?
Yes, exactly.
And what happened when you made that switch? Did you just lose gigs and
I went from maybe 50 to 60 highly paid speaking engagements at universities per year to 0 to 1.
Oh shit!
Wow, just like that.
At universities. I do, since the Boy Crisis book has come out, I've been doing them speaking engagements at a lot of different types of places, but not any at universities sponsored by a university.
Wow.
I've watched a lot of your videos and talks, and obviously we've talked now for over an hour, and to me, you're advocating for real equality, freedom for everybody, both genders. You're saying things like, look, here's the problems that men or boys are encountering. You're advocating for fathers to be fathers, and that you're saying that it's best for a child to have both parents, which sounds like common sense to me. Why are you getting so much hate? Why are people? It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand it.
It's rational thinking.
Yeah, on one level, it doesn't make any sense to me, but I do remember, when I first started coming out with these things, guys would come up to me, men in my men's group, and say, "Warren, you realize if you say this, what will the feminists think?" And it was like, Bob, I'm not going to live my life trying to kowtow to somebody's thinking that I don't feel is good in the long run. Well, you're going to lose all the income you're making in the gigs. And he was 100% right. But I said, well, I got a Ph.D. for a reason. And one of the reasons I got the Ph.D. was so I could be economically secure if my speaking out in this way does not succeed. And clearly I lost, multiple millions of dollars. And I was up for, apparently I only found out later, a MacArthur Genius Award that, when they found out that I was, taking the positions I was taking, apparently somebody spoke up and volunteered that information, and I was dropped from the consideration. And a number of things like this that I don't want to elaborate on too much, because I don't want to sort of, be in that position.
Sure.
But so I knew I was going to pay a price, but I also knew that I had saved up enough income to feel like if I completely lost my economic security, I had a little bit to work on, and I could make a transition.
Do you think the right thing to do? You were led by that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think some of this can be blamed on? Because I know when especially when there's presidential elections, there's a lot of money being spent on trying to sway voters. And one of the easiest way to manipulate people, and I talk about this all the time on the show, is to make someone feel like they're a victim. If you can make someone feel like a victim and that you have the solution, they're gonna vote for you.
Yes.
And so do you think some of the blame can be put on politicians? Because I remember recently it became a big deal, the pay gap, the gender pay gap became a big deal. Now, if economists, when they break it down, most economists will break it down and be like, okay, there really is no gender pay gap. That's due to sexism. There is a pay gap, but it's due to differences in, preferences. And here's the bottom line, by the way. If a company can hire an employee that does the same work for less money, that's all they'll do. So in other words, if it were true that women got paid less purely because they were women,
women fill the companies.
Companies would hire all women. They outsource to other countries for this exact reason. They would do the same thing here. So we know it's false, but politicians push it because, hey, we're going to have the solution. If you vote for us, we're going to make legislation that will actually probably be damaging. Do you think some of the blame can be placed on politicians trying to make people feel like victims, especially women? Because I feel like they've been manipulated quite a bit by political parties.
Yes. A politician can only be a step ahead of the people. And so when we approach politicians, as I chair a commission to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, and we went out to the Republican candidates for president when they were running in the primaries, and we talked to them about this issue. But I could just feel and see that no politician was going to say that the pay gap is not about sexism, because he was going to make she or he was going to make their constituency furious at them, and they were going to lose a huge amount of votes. Who cares that is true, that women are the victims of discrimination, mostly women, and where are the majority of his votes? Mostly women, and so they were it was just a lose situation.
Now, to be clear, men get manipulated by politicians too, just differently. Right. They tend to appeal to our nationalism and strength and all that other stuff, so we all tend to get manipulated. It seems as if humans evolved with this balance of things that women tend to bring to society and what men tend to bring to the society. I know Jordan Peterson calls it order and chaos. And if you go too extreme in one direction, if you go too extreme in the male direction, you end up with fascism and and these nationalistic type of very violent too much order, too much law. And if you go in the other direction, then it's the opposite. And so the pendulum is just doing this thing back and forth. What do we see? What are we looking forward in the future then? What are some of the issues? I know there's some statistics like for the first time ever, boys are going to be less educated than their fathers, and boys are doing worse in college than girls are for the most part. This is like the first time ever. Is that the result of this pendulum being swung over?
Yes. Well, in a lot of different ways. The boys have been doing. There's been a smaller percentage of male college graduates for quite a long time now, and since I think it's the late 70s.
Oh wow, that long. Okay.
So boys have been. We've been giving scholarships to girls in schools in many different areas, and pretty much the only scholarships to boys are in sports areas, which are not for academics, but obviously for sports. And so we have really. And I saw this. I was in touch with the data on this for many years, and so I saw this swing happening, but I saw it happening more and more. And then instead of encouraging boys to get involved in areas where they weren't involved with because of their gender, things like social sciences and psychology and the health professions, which are the growth-oriented professions of the future, we were just focusing on getting girls involved in the STEM professions, the science, technology, engineering, and math. And so this was, and I was very pleased with the encouragement of girls and women to be involved with science, technology, engineering, and math. But I was very displeased with the fact that we weren't helping our sons be trained for emotional intelligence and getting involved in the caring professions and becoming what I call father warriors. I think if we really want to help the future, more than any other single thing, we need to develop and nurture the concept of father warriors. And by that I mean from the first, second grade on, our children need to be involved in communication classes, what we were talking about in relation to minimizing the bullying, so that boys in the future who are not expected to earn all the money as a sole breadwinner, the degree to which men do not earn money as sole breadwinners is the degree to which women will want something from us other than money. And we're not going to be of value to women unless we have the listening skills, the facilitation skills. I spend almost an hour a night listening to my wife, who owns her company, dealing with the frustrations and problem solving with her. But usually 90% of what I do is just plain listen and don't solve problems. I do what you were talking about before. I ask mostly questions like, well, what do you think you should do about that? And facilitative questions that help her solve her problems rather than me solve the problem for her. Or say to her something like, you should really don't worry about working. I'll take care of that, and try to protect her from something she gets a great deal of purpose out of.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think it's important that we create a culture where boys and girls feel that they can be whatever they want.
Yes.
But I also think it's equally important that we don't go so far as to create laws that force situations to happen, because there's a lot of unintended consequences of doing that. If you think that the gender pay gap, for example, is due to sexism, which it's not, but let's say you pass law, you're like, it's due to sexism. So you pass all these laws. All you're doing is you're increasing the liability of potentially hiring a woman now, because a company's like, well, we got to be careful. If we hire this woman, we got to get all these different laws. And even if she chooses not to make as much, we got to be very careful. And so in the reality, you actually end up hurting the very people that you're trying to help.
You have, again, put your finger on exactly why I am so motivated, because what we're doing now is not what feminism should be. We are making women weaker. We are, we're making an employer who might have been afraid of hiring a woman for one set of stereotypical reasons 50 years ago, afraid of hiring a woman because if somebody touches her the wrong way, she can say it's a problem. If somebody decides to mentor her, many men that I speak to in companies say, if I have a family, I'm not going to mentor. I have a family. If I mentor a woman and she doesn't go as fast as she thinks she should go, then I'm likely to be accused of being a bad mentor. Or if I close the door, if I want to give her privacy, so I close the door to my office. If there's no window in that door,
I got nailed for that one.
I could be. Oh, did you really?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
No, I had an employee one time that I was, she did something wrong, and I pulled her in the office to speak to her and talk about it. And she flipped it around on me and called HR for, cornering her and locking her into an office. And because she's a female and it was just me and her, I almost lost my job over it.
Yeah.
Well, subconsciously, even if you're the most self-aware, evolved individual, subconsciously you may have these fears from hiring women or whatever because of some of these laws that get passed because they feel good, and they end up hurting people. It's funny, economists talk about this all the time. Thomas Sowell is an economist that I love reading, and he talks about how if pay differences were the result of discrimination, if they were the result of sexism, which they're not, but let's say they were, what you're doing by passing laws forcing employers to pay them the same amount for the equal work is you are actually taking away their bargaining chip. So let's just say you are a woman and you do live in a society that's extremely sexist to the point where an employer will pay you 75 cents on the dollar for doing exactly the same stuff. And now there's a law saying you can't do that. Well, if they're sexist, then since I'm paying you the same amount as a man, then I'm just going to hire men. And so there's all kinds of unintended consequences that follow from these policies that are passed because they feel good rather than being based on actual reality, truth, and even just consequences.
Yes, and as you said before, and when I did the research for why men earn more and what women can do about it, the first thing that got me doing the research, I started the thinking on this process when I was with NOW, and I was leading the Women's Strike for Equality's Man's section. And I was thinking, and these were the days when women were supposedly being paid 59 cents to the dollar for the same work as men. And I thought to myself, well, if I could start a whole bunch of companies, hire only women,
and outcompete everything.
And I could produce the same product for 59 cents that other people were producing for $1, I'd wipe everybody out. And then I started asking myself, well, I wonder if that's true or whether it's more complex than that. And that got me going on wondering whether it was true or more complex with that, because obviously and the thing is that somebody may not be wise enough to do that, but the person that was wise enough to do with that would finally
dominate.
They would dominate.
They would dominate. Do you also think that maybe it's also there's societally speaking that the entrepreneur, the risk taker, the money maker gets a lot of the accolades, but the person who takes care of the kids, who connects with the other parents, who is in the community, which is, by the way, not equally as important in my opinion, probably more important. Okay, in my opinion, probably more important. But let's just say it's equally important. Do you think that maybe they think of men as the oppressors because those risky things get all the accolades, and what they're doing, maybe nobody's really giving them credit, or they're not hearing a lot about it, and society doesn't seem to value it as much. Therefore, hey, it's not fair. I have to stay home and do this thing over here, and they get all this attention because they're running this multi-million-dollar company. So this isn't fair. Do you think that may be part of it?
Yes, and it's part of what contributes to the deception. What we do, and the reason I talk in the Boy Crisis book so much about social bribes is that one of the ways we got men to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week, to give up family, to do things that they had to do, like be the principal of a school or the superintendent of schools, rather than do what their passion was. We got them to do that, to join the military and be willing to die. We bribed them with names and titles and accolades
and glory
yeah. Exactly. And so what we guys have to get is that it's not a good definition of power to feel obligated to earn money that someone else spends while we die early. If I were to say, I'm going to do an empowerment seminar for women, I'm going to teach you how to earn money, feel obligated to earn money that somebody else will spend while you die early, I feel like you must be crazy.
Right.
But we have been ignorant, naive, stupid enough to accept that definition of power and to be a victim of the need to feel that we have self-esteem by being praised and getting those accolades, rather than ask. But when the Pew Research Center says to men, what would you really love to do? Still, even in this framework of these accolades, 49% of fathers say I'd prefer to be with my children, because once you've had a taste of love, you realize that working away from the home,
it's not nearly as fulfilling.
To get love is not nearly as fulfilling to most people. Now, for some men, it may be more fulfilling, and for some women, it's more fulfilling, obviously. But women have these three options: work full-time, children full-time, or some combination of both. And our three options are still work full-time, work full-time, work full-time, and then we're told we have the power.
Do you think there's a lot of people, because, maybe let's say a lot of girls who grow up and hear this, I'm oppressed, that rather than doing what maybe they really want to do, which is, maybe work part-time or not work and have children, that they
or be a mother,
they push themselves
right.
to work, go to school, get Ph.D., 37 years old, working, I make a lot of money, 38 years old, whatever. And then, do you think there's a lot of these people who are like not finding fulfillment and not being happy because they did the opposite because of the thought that they were being oppressed?
Yes, I think there is a certain percentage that way. The good news is for women, we do have a society where if the woman becomes like our daughter is home taking care of our grandson, and she's full-time home. She's working from home with Etsy, but she works in a flexible type of way from home. And so she feels perfectly acknowledged by us and most people for doing that. If my son-in-law were to be the one doing that, there'd be much more of a mixed message. On the other hand, if our daughter was more oriented toward earning a lot of money and was the primary breadwinner, she'd get mostly accolades for doing that.
Sure.
And if she did some combination of both, we'd be okay with that. And so we're giving women much more permission to go the direction that their personality dictates. And that's what we as parents need to do. For the first time in history, we have the potential for boys actually becoming human beings rather than human doings. For father, and so we have to be encouraging our sons as well as our daughters to get in touch with who they are and not what other people will praise them for. Praise is a social bribe that can be a prison for doing what you want to do. And the degree to which a certain percentage of women have gone that way and just worked, and then they get to be 35 and they realize, my God, I've been so attached to my work, I maybe can't have a child now. And so that is a problem that a number of women are experiencing.
You said something earlier that I thought was really fascinating about the cheerleader analogy with the football player. Do we see this also in other examples in life? I'm just curious if you've written about this. in like adulthood? Is there more examples that are similar to that, where the cheerleader is cheering us on to go take risks like that, and so we feel compelled to do that? Is there examples of that in adulthood?
Basically, boys become men who are doing that type of thing all the time. So when a man and a woman begin to think about having a child, and the woman makes, the family discussions are often, what will the woman do? Will she do this full-time work, full-time children, some combination of both? And the man sits around sort of waiting for, okay, after she makes her decision, I have to figure out how much money I need to make it, to be able to move into a good neighborhood with good schools and so on. And so he is, for the rest of his life, being praised, or at least minimally acknowledged, for doing the earning of the money without ever asking himself the question, did I really want to remain a teacher, or be an artist or an actor that doesn't make a great deal of money, and bring our children up at the $50,000 a year level rather than the $250,000 a year level, and so I think men do this till the day they die. And oftentimes, when a man's reputation is for, he got to a certain level and as a CEO or as a top executive, and that's what we admire him for. In fact, when you ask him, would you have loved to have spent more time at the office, or would you have loved to have spent more time with the family? Almost to a man, men say, I wish I had spent more time with my family rather than at work.
Mm-hmm. I think if we do what you say and encourage kids to, or at least create a society where they're free to choose whatever they want, I think we'll still see lots of differences, but we'll be okay with them.
Yes.
I think, if you look at, there's a biological difference here. I mean, studies will show that, for example, if a man has a scar on his face, many times women will find him more attractive. Well, anthropologists say, well, that's probably because he demonstrates that he's really to take risks and, fight for resources and whatever. That's not true. The opposite. If a woman has a scar on her face, she's not typically considered more attractive by a man, because we don't necessarily value that in women, where we may value more things like fertility, empathy, and care. They may value things like risk-taking, assertiveness, and confidence, and those types of things. So I think there's a biological driver, and I think it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't understand the push that's so hard. I do understand early on, there definitely were some oppressive situations. Women weren't given the same rights. They weren't allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to do certain things. But today we all are. And I think it's okay if we choose to do whatever the heck we want.
Absolutely. The whole purpose of gender liberation is to create choice for both sexes. And you're absolutely right that if we do that, there still will be a significant male-female gap in choices. And that's okay. What we do want to do, though, is see areas where there is a lack of encouragement and discouragement. And that's particularly true with valuing men as potential fathers. Mm-hmm. I was saying before about creating the concept of a father warrior. And the first step is to train boys to be able to communicate in school. A second step is to train parents to be able to, when asked, if you have a younger sister or younger brother, to change their diapers with them, and to feed them together, and to be considerate of them, but also be challenging of them, to learn from an early age that you will eventually be a dad, and here are the skills that it takes to be a dad, and to value those, and that to be a dad full time, it's going to take overcoming a lot of barriers. That's why you're called a warrior, because warriors overcome barriers. And so if you, so there's hundreds of things we can do in the school system and at home to train boys to be good future fathers, including mentoring, including Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and learning how to talk about their emotions and feelings rather than repress their emotions and feelings.
Excellent. Great conversation.
Yeah.
Great conversation. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on the show.
It's been really a pleasure.
You're always welcome down here.
Thank you very much. That's really nice.
All right. Thank you.